Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of your Hope Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in your God given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm thrilled when you decide to spend a few minutes of your week with us. I hope that you have been enjoying the Sacred Scar Story series as much as I have. Each guest has given hope from something painful that they've gone through and seen God bring healing, restoration, and redemption through their pain to have a greater purpose. If you are one who's going through a really painful circumstance right now, I'm glad that you're here today because we have another Sacred Scar story to share with you, and I know it will encourage your heart. My guest today is Kimberly Joy. She's a celebrated 7-time best-selling author and award-winning founder and chief executive officer of the Fellowship of Extraordinary Women International. She is on a mission to equip and empower professional Christian women to fulfill their kingdom assignments and divine destinies and to leave lasting legacies in their faith, family, and finances. Whether it's through her transformational world-class certification courses and events, her international publishing division, or the robust monthly community she's established for women around the globe, she has set her mark as a leader among leaders. And I'm thrilled to welcome her to the program today. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
I'm delighted to have you here because I know that you have a story that's going to encourage our listeners today. You know, one thing that I have learned both through private practice and through, I guess, 6 years of running this podcast is that everybody I meet has gone through some painful trials, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, relational pain, or even spiritual pain or grief or loss. And what amazes me time and time again is that frequently those really painful trials that we've been through are an opportunity for God to use us to minister to others. So I just want to open up today's episode and ask if there's been some significant event or experience that you've gone through that has brought about maybe physical or emotional or relational or spiritual pain, or maybe some combination of them.
Thank you for allowing me to speak about my sacred scars, Michelle. I have a question for you and your audience. Have you ever felt like what happened to you was like getting hit by a car?
Mm.
Would it be fair to say that people in your practice came in and that old adage, it felt like I got hit by a Mack truck?
Yep.
Well, I actually did get hit by a car. And so when people use that figure of speech, I'm a little, But yes, in 2016, I was out for a run. No, I take that back. 2014, I was out for a run in an early morning on vacation in Florida. It was about day 8 of a 10-day vacation, and I was not even a mile from where we were staying. And I crossed an intersection, and while in the middle of the lane, I looked to my right and there was a car coming right at me. And this experience, before I tell you about that moment, I need to tell you that 2 weeks prior to this incident, I launched FEW, the Fellowship of Extraordinary Women that you mentioned in my intro, knowing full well this business was my destiny, that God had shown me how I was going to make my mark in the world. I'm also a mother of 11, and I spent many, many years raising up my large family, knowing my first call was to my family. But as I got older and I stepped into the professional world, this is where God called me. And I was so sure that this was my destiny, that it was going to be international, that at this time, this company was founded by me and one other woman, and I named it FEW International by faith. It was 2 women from Wisconsin, but I knew we were going to go global. And so I have all this faith and works to match my faith. We had our first gathering. It was a smashing success. 2 weeks later, I'm on this trip in Florida, and I get hit by a car. Yeah. As the car hits me, I begin to hear like a narrator in my head. I don't know if anybody who's had physical trauma has had this experience or some kind of accident, but I call it James Earl Jones. I know it was the Lord, but it sounded like one of those great narrator voices. And I heard, that car is going to hit you. But the voice was so calm. And the news was delivered with such calm. And the voice said, that car is going to hit you. And I felt a peace come over me. And the next thing I heard was, the car just hit you, and now you're on the hood. And again, I felt the peace with this voice. And then I heard, now you're on the windshield. And it was crazy because it was happening to me, but it was being narrated. And then the next thing I heard was, now you're in the air, now you're on the pavement. And I'm laying on the pavement, kind of in the fetal position on my right side. Wasn't feeling anything yet, just in shock. And I don't mean physical medical shock. I mean, my brain was like, seriously? Now this is a little insider view to my own self-talk. Okay. So in my brain, I'm like, seriously, Kim, of all the things that you decide to do, you don't just get hit by a car, you're wide awake for the whole thing, and so I start kind of like berating myself, going, normal people would be unconscious for this. And I'm literally just saying, why are you awake? You are like, go to sleep, girl. And I'm like almost willing myself to be unconscious for this trauma, but I'm not. And I hear the voice again. And the voice says this time, why are you wide awake? And immediately I remembered when I was 12 years old and I had a bike accident. And in that case, I had received a full-on skull fracture, major concussion. I had brain damage, and I was totally okay and all was well after, but I had amnesia for 48 hours. I had none of the symptoms I was having laying on the pavement here when I'm 46 years old. And this memory of the first accident when I was 12 came flooding in. And I literally in my mind went, oh, I don't even have a head injury, because I knew if I had a head injury, I wouldn't be so coherent. I'm no medical professional, but I've been through enough to know that. And so the moment I go, oh, I don't even have a head injury, the Lord in his voice says to me, you're in the middle of a miracle. Wow. And instantly I felt all the pain. So up until that point, I felt no pain. I didn't know what had happened to me. I just was having a conversation with my crazy self and God in my head. And all of a sudden I felt the pain shoot down my right side. And I began to cry out. Well, there was already a woman by my side. She was an RN in a car, 2 cars away, who saw the whole thing. So I immediately have medical attention. She had already called 911. I mean, the Lord just took care of me from minute one. And then I was taken by ambulance to a local hospital. The local hospital thought that I had broken my leg. They came into the room and said, we've got good news for you and bad news for you. And I said, what is that? And they said, well, which do you want first? And I said, the bad news, or I said the good news. And they said, well, the good news is you've only broken bones. And they said, this is a miracle. We don't know how. You have no internal organ damage, no spinal cord damage, no brain damage, no head injury. All you have are broken bones. But are you ready for the bad news? And I said, yeah, what's the bad news? They said, you broke the 2 most painful bones in the human body, your pelvis and your ribs. So I mean, moral of the story, buckle up for the worst pain of my life, because I had already birthed 11 children. I was no stranger to pain. But I'm telling you, this pain was unlike anything I could even describe. I describe it as 1,000 sharp objects being stabbed into my body in some medieval torture session. That's the only way I can describe what I felt from that moment on the pavement when the pain hit me until the surgery, and then post-surgery, times that by 10, because they drilled a bunch of stuff into my bones and shifted me around and put me all. So I thought, oh, I'm going to feel so much better after the surgery. I had it on day 3, and day 4 was the worst day of my life. And all the while, I have to say, I was not upset with God. I was still kind of blaming myself. I was like, well, leave it to me to just run out in the middle of the road and get hit by a car. Just the way that, and I just want to say this to your listeners, whether it's a relational, financial, physical, whatever, spiritual injury, the way that we immediately blame ourselves is so from the pit of hell, that we would immediately heap condemnation right onto our wound. And that's what I did. And, but I didn't blame God, and I wasn't mad at him. And I just thought, the Lord is with me. And I've done a lot of things with him that were hard. This is another thing that God and I are going to do together. That was my attitude. This is another thing God and I are going to do together. And he's never failed me. So he's going to not fail me now. And I had an attitude of faith, but also that underlying self-blame. And meanwhile, they had not been able to get my pain under control. So I went 11 days at about a 7 to a 10 on the pain scale. And I was only a 7 for about 45 minutes every 4 hours when they'd administer the various different concoctions that they were trying, and nothing was working. And it wasn't until day 11. Well, I think you heard me mention I have 11 children. I really loved the number 11 until I was in pain for 11 days. So, and my pain didn't go away, but it was finally managed on day 11. But one of these days, I don't know, day 8, day 9, it's kind of a blur. I was in the hospital, had my pelvis reconstructed. I had all kinds of screws and things put in there to put me back together, kind of Humpty Dumpty in the flesh. And I was just waiting until I could get home. I had to get home to my children. This 8-day vacation was turning into it went on almost a full month that I was in the hospital. And I thank God I had help at home for my kids, but as any mother would be, I was in a rush to get home. And one day I was laying in the bed and just kind of praying and talking to God. I was alone, and I heard that same voice say to me, "Do you want to know why that car hit you?" And I said, "You know what, Lord, I don't need to know. I trust you." I stopped asking why a long time ago. That's not the question to ask. Question to ask is who, not why. Who, Lord, do you want to be for me in this pain?
So good.
Who do you want to be for me in this injury or this crisis or this trial or this tribulation? Who is the question I've learned to ask. Are you going to be my healer, my savior, my deliverer, my friend, my comforter? Who are you going to be? And I already knew he was being my comforter. The weird thing about this was I got hit by a car and I was in the worst shape of my life. I had no idea how I was going to run I had 2 businesses at this point, no idea how I was going to run them, no idea how I was going to take care of my kids, no idea how I was going to pay the hospital bills. And I had no fear, none. It was the most fearless season of my life, which made no sense, which proved to me he was so with me. That peace that he gave me when I rolled up onto the hood of the car had not left me. And so when he said, "Do you want to know?" I said, "I don't need to know." And then he said to me, "I'm going to tell you anyway." And I was like, "Okay, you want to clue me in on the why? Who am I to argue?" So I said, "Okay, Lord, why?" And he reminded me of a quote that I had heard some months earlier that goes like this. I heard the quote in the same James Earl Jones voice, and it went like this: "You can tell the size of your destiny by the size of your opposition."
Oh.
And I sat in this bed in the worst state of my life, pondering this quote. And it took me a minute. And I said back to him, are you telling me that, like, my opponent, my enemy, tried to kill me? He's trying to not just hurt me, he wanted me dead? And I just heard the Lord say, "Yes, you need to understand. This pain, this problem is evidence of the size of your destiny. This is not evidence of your foolishness running out into the middle of the street. This is not evidence about how you do everything the hard way because I had to stay awake while I was being hit by a car. This is evidence of the size of your call." And that's when I realized I had just launched Few 2 weeks earlier. I started to connect the dots. 30 days prior to this event, I had just run my first half marathon, and the Lord had told me to run and kind of compelled me to become a runner, because he said, if you can run your race on the pavement, because I thought it impossible for me to run. I had childhood asthma and it just plagued me my whole life, and I could never run, and he told me to run. And so I thought, if I can run in the physical, I can run in the spirit. And my evidence, Michelle, was I crossed a finish line of a half marathon. 1 month later, I couldn't even walk. 1 month later, I came home in a wheelchair. And this was my enemy's direct and immediate assault on 2 things I did that put me closer to my destiny than I had ever been. And so when I sat and chewed on this message in this bed alone with God, I just said, well then, I said that I'm going to come back stronger, and I'm going to go further, and I'm going to do bigger. And Lord, whatever dream you put in my heart, stretch out the tent pegs, expand my borders, because if he thinks that he's going to kill me before I do what I was put on this earth to do, he's got another thing coming. Yeah. And this holy indignation just rose up in me. And I looked at the doctor the next day. He came in and he said, I just need you to know that it's probably going to take a year for you to fully recover. And it's going to be a long, slow, painful recovery. And remember, I've got like 100 kids at home, 2 businesses to run. I'm just sitting there, but that's not what was in my mind. What was in my mind was this message God had given me, that this was a direct and immediate assault on my destiny. And I knew that this race that I had just run 30 days prior was happening again in 11 more months. And so I looked at the doctor and I said, I'm going to be running a half marathon in 11 months. So whatever you just said, that's all fine and good, but I have a race to run in 11 months and my training begins today. And he said, I don't know if you heard me, but I said 1 year to fully recover. I said, I will run that race in 11 months. I ran that race in 11 months. 11 months later, I crossed that finish line, that same one again. And this time, I cannot even tell you the emotion. I got a taste of what it's going to be like when we meet Jesus and we cross our final finish line. Mm-hmm. I got a taste because I came out of such opposition, such pain, such limitation, such focus, such faith it took me to go from that bed to that finish line in 11 months. It was like such a metaphor for this walk with God, this race we're running with Christ. And Paul said, run your race in such a way as to win. And I did that in the natural realm, but it made me see what it's going to be like when we meet him and we cross that line. And when I crossed the finish line that day, I had been saying for 11 months, run, walk, or crawl. I'm just going to get across the line. I don't care what my time is. I don't care if it's run, walk, or crawl. This is about finishing. I'm going to start the race and I'm going to finish it. And when I did run across it and I ran my entire race that day, I sobbed like I've never sobbed before. I felt a victory I have never felt before. And I wasn't done healing. I wasn't done dealing with the pain. I wasn't done believing God, doing the therapies, doing the natural things, all the things you do to heal your body. But my mind and my faith was on a higher level than just the physical.
Yeah. Even after you ran that race, that second race, and you had the victory, did you still have to work through emotional pain or the physical pain? Or
Yes. One really profound day stands out to me. I had a Harley motorcycle at the time. I loved riding, and I couldn't get my excitement up for the normal things I loved after the accident. Yeah. I just felt numb. We were going to go out riding and I felt like, I'm going to go riding because I should, but not because I wanted to. Yeah. And I didn't care to do social. I was very much not, unbeknownst to me, I was experiencing PTSD. I didn't realize that. But what happened is we went out on the Harleys and just did a very short ride just to reintroduce myself to it. I wanted to make sure my legs, my hips, my injury was to my pelvis, and you use your lower body when you ride. And I just wanted to be safe. So we just did this very short ride. And about 15 minutes into the ride, I just started bawling my eyes out. And I realized I'm not enjoying this at all. I don't even care about this. This means nothing to me. And it was one of the greatest joys before the accident. Yeah. And then I started to think about all the other things I didn't enjoy anymore and didn't care about. And I started to essentially make a list of the things the enemy had taken from me by hitting me with that car. And finally got back home and I started to process this. And I just said, what else is he going to take? He took time. He took progress in my business. He took my health for a season. He took so much from me just with the pain and having to sleep on the couch and not being able to do stairs. And, I can't shower without a grown-up helping me and all the things, I can't put my own pants on, all these things that he had already taken from me, time with my kids, fun with people I love, blah, blah, blah. And I just wept. And I just felt like I need to find out if this is related to the accident or if I've just been ruined for life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I just ruined now?
Right.
And so I just Googled it up, and there's just a blessing in Google sometimes, sometimes not so much. But in this case, I read what all the symptoms of PTSD were, and I went, ah, okay, so this is normal for what happened to me, and I can get help. And I did. And I got some specific treatment for that. That was really powerful. And the day after one of those treatments, we went out riding, and all my zest was back and all my passion was back. And I was like, I'm not ruined for life. But I do want to say that with all the faith that I had and all the trust I had in God, there were still some practical things I needed to do on my journey. And I heard someone say, if the counsel you're given isn't both spiritual and practical, then it's not spiritual at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really stand as a testament of that, that God didn't just, encourage me spiritually and give me promises in his word and comfort me. He pointed me to people that could help me with the practical things I needed to heal my body, my health, and the PTSD, to deal with the fear that I had. Like if I was out on the road and cars were behind me, even at first I was in a parked car one day on the side of the road, and I heard this truck coming. You can hear a truck, but I couldn't see it. I had a full-on panic attack in the car. It was full-on panic attack until that truck passed me, because I thought I was going to get hit again, and those were real scars and results of a real trauma. But I didn't have to live with that for the rest of my life. That's not my identity. That's not where God wanted me to stay. But there were practical things I had to do.
Yeah. And that's such a crucial point, Kimberly. It's that what we go through, whether it's physical or emotional or relational or spiritual, that is not our identity.
Amen.
And so often what I see and what I've experienced myself is that during those times when we are in the most painful trials, that is also the time when we are most susceptible to the enemy's lies.
Oh,
And that's why
yes.
we have to lean into God. That's why we have to stay in his word. And that's why we have to be around people who will
Yes.
speak truth when we're having a hard time recognizing that we're listening to a lie. Do you
Yes.
still have physical pain today? Because that was 10 years ago.
You know what's funny? The only time I have physical pain in my right hip, or just really my hip flexor region, I don't really have any hip pain, but is when when I'm not moving enough.
Wow.
It's like the Lord's like, keep moving, honey. And actually, I have more pain when I walk. I have the least amount of pain when I run.
Wow.
So it's just this continued reinforced message that you were born to run. And I know that my story is unique in that not everybody's going to go out and run, and not everybody's going to go get hit by a car. And I sure hope you don't, because I don't wish it on anyone. But my story is universal in that life hits you like you were hit by a car. Life hits you with various kinds of pain, but Jesus called you to run your race with him. And he's the best running coach. He's the best guide. He's the best father. He's the best friend. He is going to, if you do this with him, he will lead you to everything you need to walk in your real identity. My identity wasn't a woman, an injured woman in a wheelchair. I mean, I spent months with a wheelchair and a walker and then crutches. And I kept saying to myself, even during that time, and this might speak to someone who feels emotionally on crutches right now or emotionally in a wheelchair. I kept saying to myself, this is my life right now, but this is temporary. Yeah. I will heal. I will heal. I am on my way to healing. This is temporary. And then I would stop and say, thank you, Lord, that it's temporary, that this is not permanent. And I would remind myself and to thank him. And I think sometimes it feels so permanent. It feels like your new identity. It feels like you're never going to find your joy again. It feels like you're never going to find your zest again. You're never going to have your mobility back. I remember when I first started to walk, a half mile was so painful, because I'm still training for this race. And one of the things I did was I told myself rest days are training days. I'm going to stay hydrated. I'm going to do my cross training. That was staying in the word. You know, even when I wasn't doing anything physical, I was training. Those all were parts of my training. Then when I could be physical, it was just a little bit of walking before I ever started to run. And it hurt so much to walk. And I kept saying, this is temporary. You're just going to do a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And when I finally started to run, I was so slow. I was on such the brink of utter discouragement. Like, I was never a really speedy, fast runner, but I'm talking like I probably ran my first mile in 16 minutes. You know, it was as if I had never run before in my life. And that was very discouraging. But you know what I knew? The more I got out there, the more I ran, the shorter my time would get, the faster I would be. That it came with time and consistency. And those things that we're struggling with internally, physical, emotional, spiritual, with consistency, training with our Lord, you're going to get so good. You're going to get so good. And you're going to cross your finish line. And you're going to look back on what you overcame and say, look what God and I can do together. Look what we can do together.
And that is such a beautiful hope-filled perspective, because God doesn't want us to have to do it on our own.
No,
He wants us
absolutely not.
to lean into him, hold his hand, and
Yes.
move in forward direction with
Yes.
him. Thank you
Amen.
so much for
You're
sharing
welcome.
out of your painful wounds the beautiful sacred scars that God has brought. If our listeners are resonating with you and they want to get in touch with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Well, I'm on all the social networks at official Kimberly Joy. My business, The Few International, you find us at The Few Women on social networks, or they can just go to thefewwomen.com. There's a contact us page. If they want to contact me, my team will get that to me. So I would love to hear from your listeners. I'd love to encourage them. That would be such a joy to me.
Friends, I will put all of Kimberly's information in the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. Kimberly, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for
I
having
know
me. I
that
loved
this
it.
message is going to encourage many of our listeners. Friends, maybe you're not walking through a physically painful trial right now. Maybe it's emotionally painful or relationally painful, or maybe you're feeling distant from God. Would you just take the advice that Kimberly gave, realize that Jesus is your coach and that he wants you to run the race with him?
Yes.
Finish well. He doesn't want you to do it on your own. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And rest was part of Kimberly's training. And it may just be the part that God wants you to focus on right now. If you know a friend who is struggling and in need of encouragement, would you consider sharing this episode with them? And while you're at it, consider subscribing so you don't miss another Sacred Scar story or episode of your Hope-Filled Perspective. I've enjoyed being with you with another Sacred Scar story today. And until we get together again next week, may you have a hope-filled week.